First of all, I introduce myself. I am Laura Neri, and today I have the honor of being the chairperson of the workshop. So, Gillian, Lucy, invited guests, colleagues and friends, it is a pleasure to welcome you all to this meeting dedicated to Vijay Verma. For me, just a word. Vijay, for me, has been an enlightened teacher and a colleague, but moreover a friend. I'll not add other words on him. Today, you are here to remember Vijay in his working life and in his wonderful social life. So I give the floor to the Rector of the University of Siena, Professor Francesco Frati, that with pleasure accepted our invitation to open this workshop. So please.
Thank you very much, Laura. Welcome at the University of Siena. I understand that some of you are not from the University of Siena, but I also understand that all of you know the University of Siena quite well. So I don't have to say those few words of introduction of our university because all of you know the university quite well. I'm afraid I cannot contribute to this meeting, to this workshop from a professional point of view because I know nothing about this stuff. I'm a biologist myself, and I'm not so lucky of having met Vijay Verma before. So my presence here is simply to acknowledge the presence of the university, is to represent the University of Siena, which I have the honor to represent, and also to thank the department and all the colleagues for having had this idea of organizing this workshop in the memory of Professor Verma. One thing I understood by being here today, by reading something on Professor Verma in these days, and what I learned is that Vijay Verma has left a great memory of himself among his colleagues and therefore within our university. So let me tell you that as the representative of the University of Siena, I would like to thank him and his family for deciding to collaborate with us, and by staying here, by collaborating with our colleagues in this field, he somehow contributed to the prestige of the University of Siena all over the world. A prestige which is made by our tradition, our almost 8th century old history, but most of all, this prestige is made by the people, the distinguished professors who have taught and worked and done research in these universities. And I think that one place in this family of great scientists who have made great the University of Siena, one place also is necessary for Professor Verma. And I also think that the high quality of our, let me call it this way, school of statistics, or our research into the discipline of statistics is also due to the contribution of great colleagues, of great scientists like Professor Verma. So, as I mentioned, I cannot contribute to the scientific content of this workshop, but I want to express the great honor of our university of having hosted Professor Verma for several years, of having being his colleagues for several years, and I'm sure that he had a great time here in Siena and here at the University of Siena. Thank you very much for coming, and enjoy this afternoon of science, of discussion, and also of friendship between colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I give the word to the Director of the Department of Economics and Statistics, Professor Salvatore Bimonte, for his greetings.
Well, thank you for the invitation, and I will not take too much of your time, because first of all, I think you have to say more interesting things that I could say about this this workshop, and second of all, because I have my students, they are waiting for me to take their exam. So I will say I'm here just to say you good afternoon, and on behalf of all the members of our department, to thank you to be here, to participate in this workshop, and to share your time with us in memory of Vijay Verma. I had the chance to know him, to meet him various times, many times in Giulio's house for a dinner, and always I got an impression that he was a very nice person. He was here in the last part of his life, I think 15 years, more or less, since 2001, 2002, when I was a young researcher. And he started his collaboration with the Department of Statistics, and then with the Department of Economic Statistics, when the two departments merged because of the university reform. He was an important person, important colleague of us, because with him we shared various research projects, and also he helped us with various teaching courses in statistics. So I think we were really lucky to have here such a person, and as the Professor Frati, our rector, said, I will wish you a successful workshop, and I hope you will enjoy your time here in Siena, that is a nice university, a nice city as well. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Salvatore. Now, with pleasure, I give the floor to Professor Achille Lemmi, who many years ago introduced to many of us Vijay. So, you can start with your introduction.
Thank you, Laura. Let me introduce this workshop in a quite funny way. I will start in French. Rappelle-toi, Barbara, il pleuvait sans cesse sur Brest ce jour-là, says Yves Montand, singing the unforgettable poem by Jacques Prévert about love and war. Remember, ce jour-là, that day. But the day I intend to refer to, it did not rain continuously, but it was snowing heavily, and it was horribly cold. The place is much farther north than France. It's Sweden. And sente? Meglio? And the place was Stockholm, to be precise. Unfortunately, there is no romantic meeting with Santa Barbara, and luckily no wartime events. Only a peaceful think tank workshop organized by Eurostat on poverty measurement. And so, what Prévert got to do with it? In fact, nothing. Just that I like to remember a dear friend by starting with something beautiful, something which is able to reach out peaceful and positively to one's soul, just as my relationship was with that friend, who we are remembering today, beautiful and peaceful. So, that day, during the workshop, I had presented the fuzzy approach to poverty measurement as an alternative method to the traditional one, based on poverty lines, and therefore defined as Boolean, since referred to a dichotomy poor and non-poor, as opposed to the degree of membership to a fuzzy set of poor in the continuous interval 0-1. I also remember that we came to definition Boolean in one of the lot of discussion with Mauro Masselli and Giuliana Coccia. They are here, fortunately, today, during a period of consulting activity on poverty and inequality of mine at ISTAT. We liked the contrast between fuzzy and Boolean, and I had already brought it to the attention of the European official statistics. After the coffee break, following the session, my problem was that of finding a place where to smoke a cigarette, given that leaving the warmth of the conference center to face below 0 temperatures outside would have induced even a relentless smoker like me to resist. Looking around me, I discovered, with great joy, a type of gazebo under which a tall, toned gentleman with a beard was enjoying a cigar. In other words, a wonderful smoking area. Obviously, I rushed over, lighting my Gauloise, exchanging a knowing smile with the cigar smoker, and after some small talk concerning our shared vice, we began to talk about work and to introduce ourselves. I was greatly satisfied to discover that he had really appreciated the fuzzy approach that I had presented, and in particular the Boolean definition given to the traditional approach. He also said he would like to have remained in contact and exchange ideas on fuzzy logic in poverty analysis. We exchanged addresses and turned to the workshop session. When I told Mario Masselli this fact, he opened his eyes widely and said in his thick Roman accent, "Vedi, ma lo sai chi è quello? In pratica è il babbo di ECHP. Avremmo fatto un figurone." In English, could sound like, well, really you don't know who is he? Practically he's the father of ECHP. We had made a good impression. From that day on, lots of very close relationships were born. Also with the help of the ESERC Center of the University of Essex, a time run by David Rose. Many young at that time, of course, researchers from the University of Siena, namely Giulio, Bruno, Nicoletta, and Gianni, spent profitable periods of study and research there, having the opportunity to work elbow to elbow with Vijay, who at that time taught at that university. Then, other young researchers spent periods in Vijay Research Company in London. Precisely in London, let's go back to our topic on fuzzy. According to Vijay, the approach was very interesting, but required deeper study on both logic formal and constructive level. He showed me by scribbling on a paper serviette at the restaurant where we were having a dinner, his suggested improvement, a diagram of the Lorentz curve with the retroaccumulated sample distribution of income receivers, which we had used as a membership function, and to which he suggested adding the equivalent distribution of the income amounts as to complete the overall view of the phenomenon, also from the point of view of the so-called income power. I particularly liked the idea, and he told me he would have worked out it as well as think a more acceptable way of placing the income and the other indicators of need together. At this point, a whole new area of study opened to me. An area which until then I had only glanced at, even while working on technical efficiency, that of sampling survey panels. And being able to access all the ECHP material and the practically complete knowledge of Vijay, from the foundations to the tricks, from theory to computational practice, of a very rich, serious, and reliable database like the ECHP. Hence, a rare fortune, which I was able to exploit to the full by working with the best teacher in the right place. Then, the integrated fuzzy relative approach was born, the so-called IFR, which, beginning with that scribble on a paper serviette, completed the original totally fuzzy and relative proposed by Bruno Kelly and myself, not only with the more complete definition of the membership function, but also, and above all, with the joint membership functions and their predefinition in the logic-mathematical area of fuzzy analysis, essential elements for analyzing segments of population and/or dynamic analysis, with the important definition of cyclic and chronic poverty. Moreover, Vijay introduced the fundamental relationship between the overall fuzzy multidimensional poverty index and the generalized Gini inequality index, a strong analytical connection from poverty to inequality analysis in the multidimensional framework. And then many other very important things occurred. Researches for the European Commission, various requests for research group, papers, books, and the most important and fulfilling thing of all, Vijay is moving closer to the research group, which in some way more informal than institutional, based more on esteem than a hierarchy, revolved around me. A moving closer, which at a certain point also became physical, tangible, when Vijay and Gillian moved to Siena. A choice for life, certainly influenced by the beauty and worth of our city, but surely also determined by a group of people who he liked being with and those interests he shared and who he wanted to share his knowledge and study and research choices with. For this, that group of people will be eternally grateful, and this workshop it is to show affection, gratitude, and profound esteem. Let me conclude this introduction with the words with which another great man, who I had the occasion and honor to know and appreciate, used to close his message and communication. They are two wonderful words, even if not very used, even if not used very much in Italian, but which are typical of the cultured and perfect Italian, sometimes slightly old-fashioned, but at the same time musical and harmonious, which betrayed the Argentinian origin of Camilo da Gum. Un forte abbraccio. So, un forte abbraccio, Vijay.
Thank you very, very much. And now it's time to introduce you with an immense pleasure, Professor Brian Williams, which is our guest today. During the organization of the workshop, I have learned that he was a very close friend of Vijay. They were classmates in their doctoral program in Cambridge. Then they went on many and separate ways. Brian was professor at the Stellenbosch University, He is one of the main driving forces behind the use of antiretroviral therapy to stop AIDS. Indeed, he was one of the founding members of the South African Center for Epidemiological Modeling and Analysis. Now, after this introduction, I stop. I don't want to take any more his time, and I give you the word.
Thank you very much indeed for that very kind and generous introduction. It's an enormous pleasure for both myself and my wife Eleanor to be here. It's such a beautiful town. It's really quite exquisite, and we're very happy to be with you today. Before I begin, I would like to thank you on behalf of Russell Cheng, Stanley Ireland, Tony Stevens, and Wally Orchard, who were Vijay's friends and fellow students in Cambridge so many years ago now, for organizing this meeting to remember a dear friend and a dear colleague. Russell was then still an undergraduate, was a statistician who could paint and play the piano, and was the captain of the college hockey team. Here he is with Vijay 40 years ago, and here he is with Vijay a little bit more recently, when most of us had lost our hair. Stanley Ireland, our classicist, studied ancient Greek and was always a steadying influence when we got out of hand. Tony Stevens was an engineer who was the one who brought us all together again a few years ago in Cambridge. Wally Orchard was a chemist and fellow South African, and once playing cricket for his school, he bowled out the entire cricket team of my school. I came to Cambridge to study physics. This was me when I was much younger and had more hair, to study physics, and Russell taught me statistics. Arriving in Cambridge in 1967 from India, South Africa, and England, for all of us, but especially those of us from the colonies, Cambridge was a daunting place, with alumni that include Isaac Newton, Charles Darwin, James Clerk Maxwell, John Maynard Keynes, Bertrand Russell, Srinivasa Ramanujan, Alan Turing, our contemporary Stephen Hawking, and many others. E.M. Forster, who was the author of A Passage to India, used to come and drink beer with us in the bar in the college. In those days, the world was in turmoil. Indira Gandhi was the Prime Minister of India. The war with Pakistan was soon to start, and East Pakistan was to become Bangladesh. In America, the Vietnam War had just begun. Martin Luther King was assassinated. Muhammad Ali refused the draft, and Elvis Presley got married. In South Africa, apartheid was in full flood. Nelson Mandela had been in jail for 4 years, and Chris Barnard did the first heart transplant operation. In that year, Italy met Brazil in the final of the World Cup, but sadly, Italy lost to Brazil. The United Kingdom had just started negotiations to join the European Union, which they are now determined to leave, while the National Health Service and state education were as predictable as the weather. Cambridge colleges still only admitted either men or women, but never both. It was into this world and this place that Vijay arrived from India to continue his studies in aeronautical engineering and fluid dynamics. Now, with computers of extraordinary power, fluid dynamics remains difficult but tractable. When Vijay arrived in Cambridge, the university had its first IBM 360 computer with 64K of memory and programs written on punched cards. Tony was starting his PhD using an analog computer. My telephone now has a memory and speed about 1 million times greater. So the work that Vijay was doing required phenomenal ability, insight, and skill. But for me and for all of us, we knew from the first day of meeting him in King's that he was a person of exceptional kindness, thoughtfulness, and concern for others. Well, an understanding of fluid dynamics and boundary layer flow is what keeps aeroplanes flying and all of us safe. It was clear that he was going to find ways to use his analytical skills to make the world a better place. So having done his doctorate in fluid dynamics, he did a master's in sociology and economics at the London School of Economics, and went to work designing and coordinating fertility surveys all over the world to better understand population growth on a global scale and the extent to which it was determined by economic conditions. Russell gave him some statistical support. From there, he was invited to work for the United Nations Statistical Office in New York, where he and Kofi Annan used to walk their children to school together. He became the director of the International Statistical Institute Research Center in The Hague, professor at the University of Essex, and finally found a home here in Siena. Vijay's career speaks for itself, but the most important thing is that he was a loving husband, a good father, and a dear friend. So we will always remember his smile and his kindness, and we'll reminisce about the good times we had together. All of us on the slide, we stayed in a hostel of King's College called Pease Hill. As far as we know, it has nothing to do with peas, and only the flatness of East Anglia could justify the use of the word hill. Then we had wonderful parties, drank more than we should have, stayed up till early hours, putting the world to rights. We were scolded by Dolly, our lovely hostel keeper, who always referred to us as her boys. Russell remembers Vijay demonstrating his artistic skills at an unforgettable Pease Hill party, attended by several hundred people with Aztec theme. Drawings of Aztec conical figures to decorate the corridors and the stairs. Vijay decided there were too many male figures for his liking and proceeded to redress the balance and demonstrate another of his many hidden talents by single-handedly turning up dozens of excellent renditions of attractive young Aztec ladies. Now we have lost Vijay, but we will never lose the memory. Wally Orchard reminded me that while King's was famous for its choir and its intellectuals, including Alan Turing, who in an extraordinary tour de force invented the digital computer, King's was never known for its sporting prowess. So when our hockey team faced a much stronger opposing college, we recruited Vijay to play his first hockey match ever in goal. When one of the other teams struck a blazing shot at the goal, Vijay desperately threw his hands in the air to protect his face, deflected the ball, and saved the critical goal which gave us the match. One summer, half a dozen of us decided to do a tour of Europe, for which we hired a minibus and made our way across France and Switzerland, down to Greece and across to Italy, which brought us back up through Siena, not knowing that half a century later, Vijay would make his home in this lovely place with many of you who are here now. We would like to think that it was that holiday that instilled in him his love for Italy. In between the driving and the talking, the sightseeing and the drinking, we discovered that his many talents did not include swimming, and indeed he couldn't even float. Sadly, in those days, none of us had cameras, so we were left with just memories. Well, we were blessed to have Vijay as a friend. He was blessed to have Gillian as a wife. Stan remembers that when Vijay was when Vijay was courting Gillian, he would insist upon escorting her back to her flat, and she would then insist on escorting him back to Pease Hill with the prospect of an infinite loop. But after Cambridge and King's and Peace Hill, we all went on our many and separate ways, and living in the time before social media, we lost touch with each other. But with great fortune, Tony organized a Peace Hill reunion in March of last year, and Gillian persuaded Vijay to come. So for one evening, we could all relive our youth. Tony regaled us with the story of Vijay being on the wrong train in India, going in the wrong direction for 2 days. On another occasion, Vijay rang Tony from his London office. After half an hour, Tony said he enjoyed talking, but was there a particular reason why he had called? Apparently, he was locked in his office and was killing time waiting to be rescued by the police. Weeks later, when Tony asked Vijay how long he'd had to wait for the police to arrive, he looked a little sheepish. The police had not come because he'd given them the wrong address. So Vijay described himself as a freelance researcher and thinker, and all of us who knew him would agree. It says a lot about Vijay's international standing that he was able to pick and choose the projects which interested him. But as Tony reminded me, there were not many subjects on which Vijay did not have strong views. It was always difficult to win an argument with Vijay. The best one could hope for was a score draw. The last time Eleanor and I saw Vijay was on a visit he made to Geneva only last year, when he spent a night with us promising
We all appreciate your contribution. I can understand that it is very, very, very difficult. Thank you. I call Gianni, Professor Gianni Betti, to read a tribute to Vijay.
Okay. Good afternoon to everybody. I'm just reporting a letter sent by Mustafa Aki Hodzel, who is the head of the Statistical Coordination and Special Topics Unit, Department of Statistics, International Labour Office in Geneva. So these are the greetings from Aki. Dear colleagues and friends, I wish I would have been among you today. However, due to my earlier commitment, I could not make it, unfortunately. It was in the late 80s when I firstly met Vijay. At that time, I was a junior labor statistician working for the National Statistical Office in Turkey, Turkstat. He, Vijay, came to Turkstat upon suggestion of Farhad Mehran, former director of Department of Statistics of the International Labour Office, who was also working with Turkstat. Farhad was helping us in developing the survey tool, and Vijay was helping us to develop the sample design of the labor force survey, which is still currently being implemented regularly in Turkey. At that time, he, Vijay, was the one of the three authors of surveys of economically active population, employment, unemployment, and underemployment. Aki has also given us the link to this online publication. Then Aki is continuing. I remember very well my first meeting seeing Vijay. It was his first mission to Turkestan, so it was late 80s. So Vijay was 40, more or less. My colleague and friend Hasibe Dedesh, that we know her very well, who was another junior sampling statistician at the time, working in the research and methodology department of Turkestan, invited me, Aki, to a meeting to be held with Vijay to discuss the technical issues on the sample design of labor force survey. When I, Aki, entered the meeting room, he, Vijay, was sitting in a chair, smoking a pipe, you know, like previously said by Achille, a cigar, smoking a pipe, and had his leg extended, you know, you can imagine, encased in the plaster cast. A crutch stood beside him. He had conducted his very first mission to Turkestan in Ankara. So it was late 80s. In the meeting, he first listened very carefully all our explanations, having his usual lovely smile on his face. Then he explained the possible solutions immediately. You know, he didn't need time to think, to elaborate. He went beyond helping to the improvement of the sample design. He provided training to the relevant colleagues in his first and subsequent missions as well. It was fun and instructive working with him. He had worked on almost of the most complicated sample designs of the surveys and improved their sample designs, all of them. During his countless missions to Turkestan, he did not only help to improve the sampling designs of the surveys, but also created a reliable team on sampling. This is very important. Headed by my close friend Hasibe Dedesh, who passed away as well, just 1 month later than Vijay. I remember last October 2018, I was in Ankara when Hasibe Dedesh passed away. So I really suffered this situation. When I, Aki, informed Hasibe about Vijay's loss, she was in hospital, of course, and suffering the final stage of stomach cancer. She cried as if she lost her brother. I, Aki, changed jobs and joined the ILO's statistics department and their international program on the elimination of child labor, IPEC, in 2001. He, Vijay, and I continued our collaboration in the ILO as well. He first became a member of the External Advisory Committee on Child Labor Statistics, known as SEAC. SEAC was to the Statistical Information and Program on Child Labor, SIMPOC, which was the statistical arm of IPEC, the International Program on the Elimination of Child Labor. He, Vijay, was one of the 12 eminent researchers in that committee. He made excellent contributions to the development of SIMPOC methodologies. He had contributed to the development of sample designs of many surveys in developing countries. That is important. Sometimes he worked as consultant and sometimes based on simply the friendship, you know? Just, okay, I work for free. I'm happy to work for free. In the last 3 years, we were working very closely together on labor migration statistics. Thanks to his commitment and excellent contributions, the 20th International Conference of Labor Statisticians, ICLS, endorsed the guidelines concerning statistics of international labor migration. Again, here, Aki gives the website of the document. In addition to his valuable contribution on the statistics of labor force, child labor, forced labor and labor migration, global estimates of child labor, forced labor, international migrant workers, Vijay wrote 2 excellent sampling manuals. The first one, sampling for household-based surveys of child labor, and the second, sampling elusive populations, applications of child labor. Again, here there are some references, and I also see some of these books that Gillian has brought. Maybe they already disappeared. Yeah, so this is very important. So these are excellent publications that include so many details and tips that cannot be found in any other textbook. We are extremely grateful for his dedication, scientific sensitivity, and his humanistic character. It was a great pleasure to work with him. I, Aki, always remember him with his nice, friendly, smiling face. We miss him a lot. Thank you for your kind attention.
It's not easy to do. Before the coffee, we decided to anticipate the speech of Professor Matthias Kili. It's a great pleasure to introduce him. He's an expert in sampling design, survey methodology, poverty. So he has much in common with Vijay. I'll not add any more on his profile, but I have to add something which is very important, actually. To the invitation email that I sent to Matthias in June, he answered writing, "Many thanks for the invite and opportunity to honor Vijay's spirit for our life and work." These are his words. This answer struck me a lot, and we used some words to compose the workshop title. So thank you very much, Matthias, and I give to you the word.
Thank you for your kind words. Thank you for the invitation. Dear Gillian, dear Laura, dear Lucy, Gianni, and distinguished colleagues, it's really a great honor to be here, gathering in memory of Vijay. We came in gratitude to express our thanks to what Vijay has done to our work. The opening lines of Vijay's CV, they start that Vijay Verma has made significant contribution to the development of international statistics. And I'm here to give witness of that. I'm here to give witness which people Vijay has inspired and how he did that. I work for the Austrian Statistical Office. And Austria, as you know, is a small neighboring country of this country. Yet technical expertise is very hard to find, you know. And still we have the same challenges when we do surveys than have the big countries. So really the small countries and the countries that may not be as developed as big statistical agencies, they really crucially depend on support and willingness of experts like Vijay was. We depend on others who are able and willing to share their experiences. So like all the producers of statistics in particular on income and living conditions, Statistics Austria is very much indebted to Vijay. His contributions made EU Silk, Achille has already mentioned the ECHP, but also EU Silk, the more modern version of the ECHP, is the key instrument for measuring poverty in the European Union. Before this meeting, I spoke to many colleagues who knew Vijay well, and all regret that they cannot be here in person and wish to remember Vijay. Eric Mallier, just to take one example, he's the coordinator of NetSilk, a network of statistical offices in the European Union. He assured me that the thoughts of this community are with us here today. The inspiration that Vijay has given to the measurement of poverty is not confined to the borders of the European Union, of course. We have already heard about Turkstadt and other countries that Vijay has inspired. I just would like to mention the World Bank, which is the custodian agency of the global goal of reducing poverty, has described EU Silk as unique in the world. It should be everywhere. And Vijay for sure has had a fair share on that. I'm also acting as the chair of United Nations Economic Commission for Europe task force on the disaggregation of poverty measures. In that context, Vijay and I had agreed that we would put together a chapter for a report which should provide technical guidance for countries in Eastern Europe and Central Asia. So the countries that I spoke of before, the less developed countries that would have hugely benefited. And I'm very grateful that Gianni Betti has agreed to continue this important work in Vijay's spirit. So I think I find solace in the fact that Vijay has given inspiration, but the work goes on, and with that, I think we can do best to pay tribute. What Vijay spirit means to me, I shall try to answer in a brief reflection on error and humanity. I traveled here yesterday from Vienna. Vienna is the city where Ludwig Wittgenstein lived, another scholar of Cambridge. And he became famous for his claims of scientific language to be absolutely flawless. We shouldn't speak about sentiments and feelings. And we gather here as academics, researchers, and very hard to talk about the sadness that we feel when a friend goes. It's very difficult to find words to express how that can continue, the immortality that is there, I think we can all feel. So it's really difficult to talk about feelings in science. And what Wittgenstein said, I think, can be expressed in this image. We are the flies trapped in a fly bottle. And that's the sole purpose of philosophy, the people who like wisdom and like to spread that. The whole purpose of philosophy and science is to help that little fly out of the fly bottle. And in order to find the way out of the fly bottle, you need somebody, an educator, that empowers you, that helps you find out the way. So Wittgenstein, in this case, he had proposed to just cover it, because the fly tries very hard to escape, but will never make it through the glass wall. But if you cover it, then the light goes away, and the fly will find itself the way out. That was his suggestion. So I think it's all in this picture, what I think Vijay has given to us, small flies in the statistical world. So Vijay was very tolerant to our own instincts, I would say. I spent very precious little time with Vijay. I had first seen him about 20 years ago, so not as long as you before, but 20 years, and it were quite inspiring years. I met him first in the Eurostat working group of the European Community Household Panel. I was in my mid-20s, or a complete novice, no idea of anything. We were all really impressed by Vijay. He was using an old-fashioned overhead projector and scribbling a few formulas there, and it contained everything that was important to us. It seemed so simple. He was very humble in doing that, and in the evenings we gathered together for dinner, and he always listened to us, to all our concerns. That was very impressive to me as a very young statistician. Actually, I'm a sociologist. I'm not even a statistician. So. Strangely, our connection got even more personal without having met. Ursula and myself, we were visiting researchers at the University of Essex. Also, Gianni was there before us, I think, much longer than we were. And we were together as a family, together with my mother-in-law and our 2-year-old daughter, staying in Vijay's and Gillian's house in Wivenhoe. It was beautiful there. We had a great experience. Vijay wasn't there, of course, but I was following a couple of days after I arrived. I was following his course on sampling in Essex Summer School. So it was really inspiring up to the present day. You know, Vijay to me was a funny, great professor. You know, and he had a very funny bathtub. I remember, if I may say so, in his bathroom with 2 water taps, and it was so difficult to wash our daughter's head. And Vijay was just like this lovable, peculiar bathtub to me. So Vijay was the great educator that I have spoken before of. He taught by example. He was ready to dismiss all his preparations, you know, and tirelessly answer our questions, and I had really lots of them. And I always had the feeling they're not stupid, so let's go on. And that's what I could benefit from. So the course was only 5 days, but until the present day, that is what I draw upon in my professional life. In 2010, so quite a long time afterwards, I met Vijay at the EU SID conference in Warsaw, and that was probably the most memorable event in our relationship. First of all, Vijay had advised me there to stay at the statistical office because I was wondering, should I go somewhere else, you know, more fun? No, he told me, stay there, it's good for you. So he motivated me. And that is, of course, important for my career. It's also important for my employer. We had long walks and challenging discussions about probability sampling. But moreover, and more importantly, the entire delegation of young Austrian statisticians had the pleasure to dance with Vijay together in the discotheque. The whole night we spent in this discotheque. And we felt that Vijay was accessible. He was human. And we felt he respected and embraced our own humanity. Having experienced Vijay as a joyful man of flesh and blood, it meant all of us, a lot to all of us. What I perhaps wish to say about humanity, therefore, is that sometimes statisticians just need to dance together to make progress. Now, let me turn quickly to the second and more formal part of my reflections. Vijay really was, and just to give an example of the kind of work that he has inspired, he inspired my way to look at errors, sampling errors to be more precise, but that's not the whole story. And the purpose when we measure poverty is to do something about policies without indicators. They appear unguided and are at risk to leave behind those who are most vulnerable and in greatest need. Now, getting older and having slowly deteriorating eyesight, I now very much appreciate to have spectacles so I can see better. And this is the cover slide that I have used in a presentation in 2018 at the UCIL conference in Athens. It symbolizes that Vijay had planted this idea in my head that when we improve on estimating precision, then we can see sharper the situation in terms of poverty. Vijay proposed something which is to me very similar to spectacles, glasses for survey estimates. He recognized the needs for regional disaggregation of poverty. So that is just a copy of a report written in 2001 on EU SILC sampling guidelines. And here he explains how important it would be to have regional disaggregated poverty measures and comes up with a very practical, straightforward approach to accumulate estimates over time. So that was in 2001, and the idea goes back to a paper that Vijay and Leslie Kish had written together in the 1980s. The idea of rolling samples, and an idea that is inherent in the American Community Survey, which is very important. So regional estimates on poverty are very important in practice and ever increasing importance. The new European Commission will soon make a proposal how to allocate funds. The European cohesion funds, the regional funds, are perhaps the largest development funds in the world. And it is very important in some countries, such as Portugal or several Eastern European countries, more than 50% of public investment comes from the European funds. So it's very decisive where to put that money. And in order to do that, it would be a good idea to give it where it's most needed, that is, where most people are poor. So some people advocate that this money should go to the poorer regions, and efforts have been taken to improve the estimation. Efforts have been taken to improve the sample design so we can have better estimates of poverty, but then soon comes up the question of money. It's much too expensive to increase. Sorry? It's flying out. And it's just too much effort to increase or meddle with sampling designs. You know, statistical offices are slow institutions, and I think Vijay was very talented in giving life to slow institutions, wasn't he? Not only statistical agencies, also bureaucracies, as Ursula will tell you, and perhaps universities also could benefit from his lively manner. For this sampling problem, there are clever alternatives to increasing the sample size. They all have in common that they borrow strength from somewhere else. So if EU SILC is not strong enough to give precise estimates of poverty, so let's look for other information that we can use to plug into EU SILC. And the most simple of those approaches, there are very sophisticated approaches, but the most simple is just to accumulate over time, just to take estimates over time and then take the average of that. And we did an assessment once where we compared this simple method that Vijay and other colleagues here at Siena have continuously advocated, is just performing just as well as a more sophisticated small area estimation. So the advantage of that is it's a pocket calculator exercise. 3 estimates, sum them, and divide by 3, and then you get a totally easy estimate of poverty, something that I would refer to a AAA estimate. So now we have a trouble to estimate the precision of that estimate. Of course, it's better in some sense, it has a higher precision, but what is the precision gain? And that is possible. Vijay has demonstrated that in several papers, but it's not so easy to put into practice sometimes. So I would just like to tell you that in Statistics Austria, we revisited Vijay's approaches, and we have come up with a solution ourselves. I think in 2010, Vijay, Gianni, and Francesca, I think, together wrote and explained how we could have better estimates of the precision of regional poverty estimates. And I think in practice it has not been used so much as it would deserve, and that had two reasons. I think one is that in the EU-SILC microdata we lack the information that is required sometimes. The sample design is not so well documented, and Vijay never stopped pushing us to provide that information. And also longitudinal identifiers, which are necessary to do that kind of calculation, have not been there until very recently. So at Statistics Austria, we have produced a program on our package called Survey SD that does a very similar thing. It's not the same method, it's not jackknife, it is bootstrap, but it has a simple logic, 3 steps. First, we take out of the sample randomly weights. We carry forward those weights to subsequent waves, and we recalibrate those weights to ensure that the distributions are consistent. And then we just calculate the indicator again and again, and the dispersion of those indicators gives an indication of the precision. So we can obtain standard estimates. And that improves the precision. You see the precision before and after. You see in red the Austrian NUTS2 regions crossed by degree of urbanization, and in blue you see the same for Spain. So we've used data from Spain and Austria, and you can see that the standard errors, they are reduced by about a quarter. And that means that we save a lot of money and still get better precision of estimates. What that allows us to do is to draw maps and see where the poor are, and they are much more precise than they would be without that method. Here, for example, you see that Madrid, unlike Austria, in Austria, cities are the most vulnerable in terms of poverty. In Spain, it's the contrary, so the cities stand out as having less poverty. So with that information, you could better direct funds. And that is possible due to Vijay's inspiration. So the conclusion which I gave to the statistical offices a year ago in Athens is, and it eventually will translate to other domains too, is Vijay left us his specs to improve on our errors. So go ahead and use them and make them even better. I strongly believe that Vijay's work, from the World Fertility Survey that has already been mentioned to his more recent works on child labor, has not only helped our comrades in statistics to do a better job. Ultimately, I would also say that his work has been and continues to be beneficial to the most disadvantaged in our societies. So, Ursula would then continue with another concrete example to illustrate from her own work at the European Union's Agency of Fundamental Rights what Vijay has inspired in our daily life. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthias, for your double contribution about the Vijay scientific contribution, and also speaking about of Vijay friend. Now we have a connection with the Statistical Festival, which is running in Treviso. So we are joined with Monica Fratesi, director of the Camillo Dagu Center, of which Vijay was a member as emeritus professor. So, Monica, I give to you the word.
Excuse me, Laura, I haven't heard you, but do you think that I can start now?
We can hear you, so for us it's okay.
Okay, should I proceed in English or Italian?
It's better in English because we have some guests which speak just in English, not in Italian.
Okay, so I'm speaking on behalf of the, we call it shortly Centre d'Agum, but to be honest, it has a very long name. It is an inter-university center, Pisa, Siena, and Florence, on statistics for advanced development. And it is my pleasure to say to you that the inspiration and many of the initiatives that this Centre d'Agum have been carried out in the last years, they were sustained and conceived together with Vijay. And so I couldn't miss the date, even if we are celebrating statistics in Treviso during the statistical festival. Just to be clear, I'm here, maybe you can't see it, but we are spending 3 days in Treviso, I would say celebrating statistics, but to be honest, it is something better described, saying doing statistics. Yes, because here we are thinking on numbers for today and for future. And I think that Vijay would have been involved in this, and he would have enjoyed. I have met him for the first time in 2002 in Pisa, even if I have been a scholar during the PhD in applied statistics in Florence. But in Pisa, he came for the first time in 2002 to give lectures in survey sampling. And since then, every activity I have started in some way was enriched by his advice. I remember the Small Area Estimation Conference in 2007. Also in this occasion, we had a conversation during which he said me, why don't you write down something like a project to submit to the European Commission? And we, in Pisa, did it, and we succeeded. After that, many years, we organized conferences and workshops and meetings. And again, why not coming together, Pisa, Florence, and Siena, in order to build up a sort of joint venture, the Centre d'Agum could be this, in order to go on in research and do something together. So, Vijay has been part of the life of the Centre d'Agum since the very beginning. I would say also in the preparatory work we have done as a team in order to make it come out and flourish. So, for me, it's an honor to talk and to tell to you all this story. And I think that the legacy of Vijay is obviously a very good asset for us. And this legacy is towards a deep studying of statistics as an applied science, and also as a set of methods, a methodology, in order to study social phenomena, with a special attention to the survey methods and the data collection phase. And in these times, I think that this is very, very important and fundamental. So, again, it's occasion to me to thank Vijay and to thank all of you for having collected his legacy and going on together in deepening our studying on statistics and on statistics for social and economic development. So many thanks, and I think that this festival has had an added value. At first we were a little bit upset because the two events were overlapping, But maybe it's a way of making the loving memory of Vijay participating to the festival, and I think that this is for sure an added value. So many thanks, and thanks a lot for having given to the Centro d'Agum and to me this space in order to commemorate him.
Thank you, Monica, for having found 10 minutes in this busy day. And I also be sure that Vijay have loved the festival of the statistics, because I think that it is a sort of meeting for young students, young statisticians, and so on. So maybe it should be an ideal place for Vijay. Thank you very much. So thank you and see you.
Would you like to add something, or we say bye?
No, we can say bye. Thank you again.
Okay,
bye.
Thank to you. Bye.
Bye. We have the next speech, which is we invite to come here to present her speech Ursula Thiel Tenshirt. I hope this is the right pronunciation. She is a member of the European Union Agency for Fundamental Rights. Her areas of expertise include survey methodology, statistical analysis, gender inequality, social inclusion indicator, living condition. And I read that she was also a national delegate to the working group on income and living condition at Eurostat, and we spoke about that just before. So I think that in that occasions, she met Vijay dozens of times, and she spent nice days and working meeting and also dinner with him. So thank you. I do not add other words.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Last fall, when I heard that Vijay had passed away, it was a shock. I could not believe it. I was so sure he would support and guide us also in our most current project, the first Roma and Traveller Survey. And then I got the sad news. Dear Gillian, dear Lucy, dear friends of Vijay, dear colleagues, let me thank you for this invitation. I'm very grateful, as it gave me the opportunity to memorize and look back on our long-time work relationship. Working with Vijay was always a very personal relationship. He was such a humble and warm person, a philosopher and friend, and I'm grateful I was able to meet and work with him. I would like to first share some personal experiences with you, and then I would like to introduce you to some of the work he did, and we are profiting today and in the future. I met Vijay first through Matthias, although not in person, just from hearing, and it was impressive. And not even when we rented the house of Gillian and Vijay in Wivenhoe, I have not met him at that time. Only a few years later, our paths crossed for the first time. In 2002, I had started to work at the Austrian Statistical Office, working for EU-SILC, the Statistics on Income and Living Conditions. We heard already today the source for poverty statistics, and as a national delegate, I participated in the task force on the revision of this instrument of EU-SILC. Vijay was there as a consultant for Eurostat. These were my true learning years in applied survey methodology. Vijay listened always carefully. As a big plenum, all the countries sitting there, very formal, and the experts sit somewhere on the side. So he was listening very carefully and accepting the boundaries of slow statistical offices. He developed the rules to ensure comparable and highest quality of EU-SILC. But still feasible to implement. He was there, the respectable professor, but still never gave me the feeling that when I dared to approach him and ask him a question, that it was a stupid question. And it might have been, I'm sure. And more than that, I was often able to understand his answers, which is rarely the case with statistics professors. And I'm not a statistician, I have to say, I'm a sociologist. And if I didn't understand, he would notice and he would check on it and he would try to explain in a way I would understand. I also remember then when I was not sure about which position to take in the lengthy and detailed discussions in the task force, I waited and I observed his reaction and either having an approving smile or not to make a decision. I would like to say that EOSILC, which is today the core source for indicators on social inclusion in the EU, would not have such relevance if not for Vijay. He also taught me that we have to make sometimes pragmatic decisions which might go along with loss in statistical precision, but that if we keep transparency and statistical reasoning for our decisions, it's fine to do so. I left the statistical office 10 years later, starting to work at the European Union Agency for Fundamental Rights in Vienna. And it is within the core of our mandate to collect data, putting that up. Yeah. To collect data on fundamental rights issues and to develop methodologies to close data gaps, either in terms of populations which are not sufficiently represented in European statistical system, or such as minority groups or thematic areas which are not covered, such as violence against women or on discrimination. In 2014, we started to develop the second EU Minorities and Discrimination Survey, which covered immigrants and their descendants and Roma. There was a pilot in 2008 and one in 2011, specifically to Roma, but we had the ambition, being a new team, to improve the methodology to obtain representative results with little knowledge on the actual target population. At this point, we asked Vijay to be our consultant, and far beyond contractual obligations, he developed this project together with us, and the contracted with us and the fieldwork company which we contracted. A lot of things were unknown at the beginning of the project, and Vijay developed methodologies which were both applicable and statistically sound. And he made this survey a leading example in how to survey hard-to-reach populations, or as Vijay would say, elusive populations. It was an important step forward as we could show that it is possible to reach out to the most vulnerable groups in the European Union. The technical report Vijay commented on and provided crucial input was the best report we ever had in the agency and baseline to persuade many stakeholders of the validity and reliability of the data. Today, we provide technical assistance to the Bulgarian Statistical Office in setting up exactly such a survey based on what he developed. The European Commission took the EU MIDES 2 data, which the survey is called, as the baseline to develop an indicator framework on Roma integration strategies, and the OECD used our data for reporting on migrants, which actually with the first pilot they refused to use our data. So there was a significant change after he was on board. And now I have to say, with Francesca and Gianni providing advice to the current Roma and Traveller survey, I feel that Vijay's approaches can be continued in the survey work of the Fundamental Rights Agency. But let me give you now some illustration about what he contributed to this project. We started to collect, this is actually sorry, I was having the wrong one, but doesn't matter. We started with the objective to collect EU-wide comparable data on immigrants and ethnic minorities for relevant indicators such as discrimination, victimization, harassments, and social inclusion in the area of education, employment, housing, health, and poverty. It was the objective to refine the survey methodologies for hard-to-reach or elusive populations, to assess the developments and progress made over time. So the question was, can we compare over time and with the general population in the 28 member states of the European Union. In total, we had 43 groups in the 28 countries to survey. 1 to 3 per country, immigrants and descendants. We defined them through country of birth of the parents, first and second generation, recent immigrants, Roma and Russian minority via self-identifications. It was a household-based survey, so we collected information on all persons in the household, similar to EU Silk. And we had quite a few ambitious questions we asked to Vijay. How can we achieve a representative population, provided that the total population is sometimes unknown or underestimated? The total population is spread out or difficult to find. I mean, how to find them? And then very important was also the human rights principle in data collection of self-identification. How can we respect it? How can we have a total population, meaning that a person has a right to self-identify, for instance, as being a Roma or being black or not, and nobody else should make the decision to classify a person to be a member of an ethnic group. So statistically, this is a challenge. And how to weight and obtain comparable data across the groups and countries. And we asked how to decide on the sample sizes for each group. Of course, we have some budgetary limits, but we didn't know these questions. How to keep the trends when changing the methodology. This was something he answered from the very beginning. He said, we always should go for the better method, even if we lose some comparability. So perhaps before I get lost in the statistical details in the following, I would like to stress the role of Vijay. He developed, he empowered us in applying, and he put always the people and the relevance of the thematic area, the discrimination, the social exclusion of the people, in the focus of his statistical work. So Vijay helped us to structure and introduce the hierarchical and tailored approach to achieve a random probability sample design dependent on the availability of sampling frame and nature of survey population. So always, first of all, having a direct sampling approach, which was possible in 3 countries. Then, if this was not possible, having an indirect sampling approach using address screening, actually, which was the biggest challenge in this survey. And then he suggested a variety of methods to boost the efficiency for the screening of addresses. The fieldwork company had suggested to boost this efficiency, focused enumeration, which you go to a household and ask the household if, no matter if eligible or not, if they would know if anybody else around, 2 addresses left, 2 addresses right, would be from the target population, but this would be external identification. So Vijay said, well, and we said, how can we keep this principle of self-identification? So nobody else should identify, but we still can manage within the budget. So he developed adaptive cluster sampling and dropping and stopping rules for each primary sampling unit to avoid screening totally empty PSUs and not to collect too many if the density is much higher than expected. In another 7 countries, the screening was not possible, and we used, because either the population was just invisible or spread out. So we had two possibilities, one as an only method in 3 countries, or in combination with address individual registers. This was a methodology developed already by Gianluca Baillot and Blangardo, but actually in its concrete application across countries, it was Vijay's work to make that possible and valid in the results. Just as a very short example for Roma countries, so the first approach was to sample primary sampling units proportional to size by region urbanity. There was a cutoff for low density areas, something he suggested to make it feasible below 5 and 10%. A random route selection of households. He agreed that we would not have enumeration for cost reasons, and we brought the project forward to screen with the adaptive cluster sampling, a random selection of household members, and the dropping and stopping rules. What is a dropping rule? A dropping rule, the idea is that the fieldwork agency was very concerned about the costs. Just imagine when you have a density of 5% of the target population in an area, you would need to go to 20 doors and knock before you can reach out to one single person on average. You might even go to 40, and you will not find somebody of the target population. So it was really important that he provided us with this algorithm based on the actual estimated density to say when the interview was able to stop and minimizing the probability to miss out on actual cases in this PSU. So we didn't have to drop many, but it also helped to persuade the fieldwork agency to go along with this approach. The adaptive clustering was an approach, I already said, to overcome the problem of external identification, but still to boost efficiency, because still you could not screen the whole country, and when the density of a population was very low in an area, but you still want to have them presented. So he suggested to go to a core, address it, and build chains, with the assumptions that the ethnic minority groups might live in close proximity in a cluster. So starting with a core address, you could go to the next address, but only as long the member was eligible. In the moment it was not eligible anymore, you had to stop and you could not continue, and you did it to a maximum chains of going 7 households forwards and backwards, and always stopping when there was not eligible. It was a complicated method to train interviews. In the end, only 2 countries really used it, but it worked and it proved to be efficient, and it can be recommended, but it still requires a lot of training of the interviews. What is important to mention here, that we were working with a market research company which was profit-orientated and had not a particular interest in extra work and time to increase quality. Vijay also joined some of the teleconferences with the fieldwork company, and with his authority, he backed our position as a fundamental rights agency. Vijay helped us to persuade our contractor of many things which at first we did not think would be possible. And when there was too much resistance, he would always help to find a compromise solution. And finally, he provided us with a sophisticated approach how to come up with optimal allocation. Our initial sample size was, as you can see, the indicative sample size. It was just equally distributed and definitely not efficient. And here again, an example of Roma, where he provided us with a formula to optimal allocate sample size with the square root of the proportion of the target group relative to the population size, but a penalty of a minimal sample size of 400 per group. And he also allowed to adjust for budgetary constraints and the reality in the field, which was extremely helpful. So it was always this compromise, which, when we have statistics, statistics are not compromising, statistics are formulas. So this was his big achievement for us, to find these compromises and to make it feasible, and we could implement it. Of course, these are just examples, and there were many, many details in this project. He also developed the actual concrete rules in location sampling, and not to speak about the weighting, which you can read in our technical report if you're interested in more details, but I will leave it out today. So what did we reach in the end? I think it cannot be, you cannot see the full slide. So with very little resources and a very tight timeline, we are just a small agency of 100 people, only 6 people working on surveys. We were able to develop this survey together with Vijay, reaching an amazing quality and developing a lot of new applications in survey methodology. In the end, we were able to provide a good approximation for the precision of estimates for all group. This is discrimination in the last 12 months, experience of discrimination, and experience of discrimination in the last 5 years, with the confidence intervals. And the sound methodology behind it created trust in the data we did not have before, and which we are extremely grateful for. And I'm speaking here not for myself, but on behalf of the Fundamental Rights Agency and the whole team, Rosalina, David, Joe, Yanis, and others who had the honor to meet Vijay in person and were equally impressed, I can tell you. We had many publications in the meantime since the survey finished in 2016. On several publications on Roma, on being black in Europe, on Muslims, all based on this data. For Roma, the indicators were used for the midterm evaluation of the Commission on Roma integration strategy in the 9 countries of the survey, and were used for country recommendations in the European semester. And the data were providing evidence for the Commission initiating infringement procedure against member states because of segregated education of Roma children. I'm not saying the country right now. So usually there would be conclusions, but at that point I would like to say just thank you, Vijay. Vijay had this love for people and a deep political understanding, which he linked with his expertise. Vijay had this dedication to tackle inequalities, and he gave those a voice which are not heard otherwise through good and meaningful surveys and statistics. He always put the people in focus of each statistical decision and calculation he made, and he spent much more time than contracted, as he would never do half things, he told me. I would like to thank his family, Gillian, Lucy, that you shared Vijay with us. This must have been not always easy for you. And he often talked about you and the kids and his grandchildren in Mexico and Norway. He also told us about his garden in Siena, where he tried to plant tomatoes. And he told us what effort it was for him to get all the stones out. And we just talked, it seems there are still many stones left. I can only assure you that what he did, and you supported, that will remain and live on in many projects and in his many scholars, to which I count myself. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ursula. And now it's time to have some spontaneous speeches. According to the program, the order in which you will take the floor is the following, but of course we can adjust. I have noted Lucy, Giulio, Francesca, Nicoletta, Giuliana, and Antonella. So, if you are ready, after Lucy, Professor Luigi Vijay. I forgot. I wrote, but I didn't read. So, if you are ready, Lucy, yeah?
This is just a short, something that I just wanted to say to my dad. So it's actually to my dad, but I hadn't, I didn't tell him. So this is to Daddy. You know more than anyone I have ever met about what is going on in the world. You're open to all people, and you do not classify anyone by nationality or upbringing or colour or type or religion or contrada. You are good. The world deserves more good people, not fewer. When I was a little child, I used to hold on to your little finger because your hands were so big. And then my little cousins, Erica and Leo and Byron, held on to your little finger like that. And then my nephews, Adrian and Elliot, and then my children, Lola and Luke, and then Manika. To us, your big hand is like an anchor in the crowd. My daughter Lola wrote a poem last year for her grandpa Vijay, which I'm going to read to you. Grandpa, loving, kind and clever, daddy of my mum, who loves walking, talking and reading, who feels happy with friends and family, who needs coffee and almonds every morning, who gives good explanations and warm hugs, who is scared of nothing, who would like to see his roses grow, who broke his leg playing badminton, who dreams of peace, who lives in Siena, Grandpa Vijay.
Professor Luigi Vijay.
Thank the organizer to inviting me to give a speech about my very good friend Vijay. I think that among us, I was the first that met Vijay, and later on I explain why. Excuse me, I prepared just 3 slides, no more, in order to avoid that my bad English pronunciation be some misunderstanding. The picture, one of the pictures, on the picture at the end I explain why. At the end I will explain why. I put the picture as the first slide. With Vijay we have a very reciprocal friendship and esteem, both personal and professional. Maybe before professional, but that also personal. Never we worked together for carrying our research. But really, we met at many meetings in a lot of Italian and international statistical congress. First of all, at the international level. In this occasion, we discussed the paper we presented, talking about possible issues and give suggestions to each other. Actually, Vijay was not only a very high international statistical scientist, as previous speaker have underlined. In my view, Vijay had other two important qualities. He was a very real friend, very real friend. Usually, he lived his important works, also his important work outside of Siena. He lived the work in order to help friends. And he was also a joking man for the friend, not for people, but for the friend he was a joking man, because it really is very easy to speak with him. And I think that it was enthusiastic to say something. The first occasion that I met Vijay is in 1977, 42 years ago, at the 41st ISI International in New Delhi. I met Vijay together with Professor Verma of Murkata, then most of you know. They both studied at the London School of Economics together, and political science in London, and at the University of Michigan, following the courses in sampling program for foreign statisticians with Kish. I met both of them. At that time, they were also involved together in the professional staff of the World Fertility Survey and written various papers and reports together. Both Vijay and Cole came in Florence at the Department of Statistics to teach at the PhD program that most of the people that are here follow, in applied statistics. I presented a paper at that occasion on some application because at the time I studied sample design. I presented a paper on some application of cluster analysis in sampling design with an application to the Italian labor force survey. Vijay gave me very useful suggestions to improve my work that then I published in a review. Since this occasion, I was proud to become good friend with Vijay and Cole. Together, we were named as elected member of SAI. We are very few researchers at that time are admitted. We are only 1,000 more than 1,000 everywhere in the world. Immediately, we tried to improve the participation at ISI congresses of the statisticians coming from developing countries, because most of the statisticians at that time and the elected members are of European countries and of the United States. So we try to do it, actually, particularly from Africa, because Vijay gave a lot of cooperation in African countries, and actually, after a few years, we achieved our aim. The second time was not a direct contact, but by email, or maybe by call, I don't remember well. I am organizer of the organization of an international workshop for training of the director of the National Statistical Office of Developing Countries. As director of the workshop, I asked to Vijay to contribute to the workshop giving lecture in the field of survey and sampling design. Unfortunately, at that time, Vijay was technical advisor of the United Nations of Statistical Office, and surely the most adequate researcher to do it. But unfortunately, during that period, Vijay was involved in various international cooperation activities. Therefore, he did not accept my invitation. As I explained before, he don't stop saying, I cannot. I cannot. Vijay did not leave me alone, because to prepare an international organization for director of the National Statistical Office, not for a staff member, but for director, was very difficult. And he prepared for me a more adequate program. I prepared the first draft, but then he prepared for me a more adequate program for the workshop that Vijay was very successful. Third occasion. I stopped at 1986, otherwise I continued for all the day. Together with Achille Lemmy, that was here, I think. And other two researchers of Florence University, we presented a paper at the 33rd scientific meeting of the Italian Statistical Society. And we presented a paper, different topic. A research on personal income distribution in Florence and Siena. The use of causal model to measure the factors that affect the income. And Vijay discussed the paper, was one of the discussants. Discussed the paper in a very frank way, giving us suggestions, before critics, then suggestions, before critics, then suggestions, for new line of research. Since then, thanks to Achille, our meeting and discussion at the seminar, congresses, and so on, became more frequent, essentially at international level, but I stop here. Vijay bear a curiosity, because if you remember this picture, Vijay Bird. Why Vijay Bird? Why Vijay Bird? It's a curiosity, in my view. But the Vijay Bird, because from the beginning I was jealous of his very beautiful, wonderful. Yeah, I was a bird, but not so long. I am the bird, but not so long, not so beautiful, not so wonderful, not so wonderful. So I was jealous. I was jealous. And what happened usually? From the beginning, for this reason, every time when I meet Vijay, after affectionate hands, a kiss, then I touch with both hands, I touch with both hands. I touch with both hands. And Vijay, Vijay that knew that I was envious of his bird, smiled. A very good smile. Every time. So I wish and hope to have in my eye and in my mind that smile of Vijay. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Vijay, for your speech and also for your ready help. Thank you very much. Now, yes, it's time of giving the word to Giulio Gallini, Professor Giulio Gallini.
A scholar, also Vijay. I have no, but I like the beer of Vijay. It's difficult to say something after all this presentation and this mood that was here today, but I try to do it. And I want to start with a welcome to the dear friends, the dear colleagues, and in particular of many Vijay scholars that are present here, and of course of dear Gillian and dear Lucy. And it's not easy for me to describe in few words the nearly 20 years of life, research, neighborhood. Many of you knows that we have a weekend neighborhood in near Monteriggioni at the loved Fienile al Bosco, as Vijay used to name the house that have there. Of strong friendship with Vijay, in one word. The great sadness of Vijay's sudden death, something difficult to accept for me in everyday life of the last year, is however smoothed and enlightened by your presence, all of you, here in Siena today. Siena, the place, said to Miss Vijay some year ago, where he was confident to pass with Gillian in serenity the last trait of his rather lively life. Unfortunately, too much short time and trait. But I don't want that the sadness for his sudden disappear last summer overcome the beautiful memory of his thought, his smile, his kindness. Then I'll try to remember through a research work that we have presented approximately 10 years ago at the ISI conference in Lisbon. In fact, I think that the title of such a paper well represents the fundamental role of Vijay as international trainer and educator in the field of survey sampling, one of his central interests in the wide spectrum of his interest on social statistics. The title was Working Statistician versus New Graduates in Survey Statistics, where, in few words, we developed the idea that heterogeneity in the plethora of participants in training course in survey statistics, in other words, the presence of both practitioners closely involved in the practical aspect of survey, but usually with limited knowledge of statistical theory, and fresh graduate statistician with a good theoretical background, but with little experience in the actual design and implementation of real survey, could be not only an intriguing challenge, but also a great opportunity. As to heterogeneity being an opportunity, the central concept to be followed in organizing such training is related to the idea of cross-fertilization, how to best utilize incoming heterogeneity in background and skills to move towards the target objective of the ideal survey statistician. Cross-fertilization, surely a keyword in this context, but also a central keyword of Vijay's way of life. I think that many of the things that are reported today is a confirmation of this, because cross-fertilization is a keyword for his scientific work, where the research has been always enriched by the contamination of knowledge of many fields. A keyword for his human relationship, as this audience well known as represented in their contribution. A keyword also, or better, a sort of azimuth compass of his political and ethical vision of the world socio-economic development. Ending my short contribution, I wish to report here a citation of one of the great fathers of the scientific thought, very appreciated by Vijay, Charles Darwin. In 1871, Darwin, in a letter to his son, wrote, sorry for my bad translation from Italian to English, but where I found this citation, but I'm not in Italian, but I'm not able to find the original version written by Darwin. The citation is the following. I was reflecting last night upon what renders a man capable or incapable of making discoveries, but I find the problem very perplexing. Many men are endowed with great intelligence, significantly superior to that of the discoverers, but nonetheless never create anything. I think that the prerequisite is a continuous search for the causes and meaning of all natural events. This implies careful observation and requires the greatest possible knowledge of the subject studied. Seems to me that Vijay have had such a prerequisite for being a great man, capable not only of making discoveries, but also to teach and spread them all over the world. As you were used to say at the end of our frequent dinner and party at Casa and Fienile al Bosco, one grappino for Giulio, a small grappa, and one grappone for me. Ciao Vijay, I miss you.
Thank you, Giulio. Now I invite Professoressa Francesca Bettio to give...
Hi. For those of you who don't know me, I'm an economist. And I'm one of the few non-statisticians in the room, right? And what I'll have to tell you will reflect on that to an extent. Well, first of all, I was very pleased to hear that, and I didn't know it, I swear, that Vijay was in Cambridge, because I was also in Cambridge, and I worked on that mainframe. I don't think that 370, maybe it was a bit higher as a capacity, but I remember the mainframe. Except I was there, I must have been there in years when Vijay was not there, or where Matthias was not there, because I don't remember meeting either of you. But it was a nice memory anyway, that mainframe. And the punch cards, right? How do you say? Archaeology nowadays. Apart from that, I want to start in reverse order from what the other speakers did. Meaning, I'll talk about my intellectual debt to Vijay in terms of work before, and then I'll tell you a small episode and the way I interpreted it to make Vijay, in a way, more human to me. And you'll hear why. Intellectual debt. Lately, together with Gianni and another colleague who is not here, I've been working on extending the fuzzy set methodology to something most people would think unlikely as a field to apply that methodology, because it is violence against women. So the idea came to my mind at some point. Having been introduced to fuzzy set methodology in my teaching of doctorates, blah, 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 in relation to poverty, of course. But the idea came to my mind that there is something in the measurement of violence that may benefit from application of the fuzzy set methodology. And there are two things in particular. One, the multidimensionality, that's the easiest bit in a way, has a parallel in violence against women from the fact that violence is not one thing. It's many, many different things. So in a way, multidimensionality fits there. The second is the more controversial idea, and it is the following. In parallel to the idea when you analyze poverty in the fuzzy methodology, and the idea is that you are poorer, the less frequent it is that people are found in your same position, right? Then I sort of thought, well, we can think of severity of violence as expressed by society. So the way society sees severity of violence as something that is inversely related to the frequency in a given society of a particular act of violence. Now, I don't want you to think about these ideas. I would be very happy if you did, of course, but that's not the point. The point is that, a fuzzy set and violence against women were not friends until then. I mean, nobody thought of matching them, right? So, of course, I spoke to Gianni, and then we worked with Gianni and this colleague to develop the idea, and now, hopefully, it's being published. But, and we really worked hard on it, and I think it works. Hopefully, it works, because it's a statistically simple, parsimonious, effective method to measure violence in a comprehensive way. Having done my marketing bit, I close here. So where does Vijay fit into the picture? It fits because obviously I was very uncertain about it, and so were everybody in the small research team doing these things. But I thought, let me talk to Vijay. I was a little apprehensive because I thought, well, Vijay has done, poverty stuff. He doesn't know much about violence, so how can I trust him, right? And in fact, he'll probably say, these things is not, something I deal with, so. No, Vijay was nonplussed. And he said, he thought a little bit, and then he said, yes, why not? It's an interesting idea. And then, of course, we worked out all the doubts. And there I decided it's worth pursuing. So that's, I think, a great debt. Because I think I would have stopped there. Maybe the idea is not worth it, right? I mean, it's still possible. But that, so thanks Vijay for that, right? He doesn't know it. I wish, he was there now that the paper comes out. But he knows somehow in his ways. Now let's come to the personal relationship. As you can guess, I'm a peppery character, right? So I like to smile, but I also get angry very easily. And I can get furious very easily, right? Now, in my dealing with Vijay, sometimes this fact that there was always this smile, and you couldn't destroy that smile. That smile was always there. And I thought, well, this man is too kind to be real. There must be ways in which, he gets angry, he gets whatever, right? Honestly, I couldn't find direct evidence. But I thought I found indirect evidence in just one episode. And the episode is as follows. We somehow got to talk about, I got to ask him about something. Obviously, I'm not a statistician. I know data. I'm a data crunching person. I know econometrics. But, my statistics is average. Let's put it that way. It's improving. So I was asking him about sampling methods, so on and so forth, and I was working on, I forgot what I was working then, probably some labor issues, because I'm a labor economist. And then he mentioned about his book, Sampling of Elusive Population, which was relevant to the topic we were talking then. And I said, could I have a copy? Of course I was, I didn't know it was distributed today. Then, of course. And he looked at me obliquely. He didn't talk for a while, which was not like Vijay. And then finally he considered, okay, you will have a copy. That's what I understood. And the way I understood this episode is, look, he can be very softly rude. And I was in peace with that because I was looking for that. Probably I was totally wrong, right? But I was in peace. It was, I recognized in Vijay something that was in me, of course, and that's what I wanted to see. But I got the book. And I take advantage of that to ask about another book I would like to have, but nobody mentioned. Probably it is online, I don't know. So I asked all the people here, and that is, I know that he has, left us just after finishing the book on migration all over the world that he was doing for ILO. Is there a copy available? Can we... Information about that. Anyway, I really miss Vijay.
Thank you, Francesca. Now I invite Nicoletta to come here for her words. She is Nicoletta Pannuzzi.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, dear Gillian, and thank you, Lucy. Nice to meet you today for the first time. And thank you, everybody, for the invitation. Dear Vijay, I decided to write you this short letter to express, for the first time publicly, what you represented for me during the year we spent together at the University of Essex. You were, first of all, a friend, a teacher, and above all, a teacher of life. It was the year 1996. I arrived in Essex University thanks to a Human Capital Mobility Fellowship, and after a very cordial and kind welcome by Professor David Ross and Marcia Taylor, may she rest in peace, I met researchers and professors very busy and frantic in carrying out their scientific work. During a lunch seminar, if I remember correctly, I've met you, and while I was introducing myself, I saw in your eyes a movement of tenderness toward me. Before even asking me about my research interests, you showed me interest on me, on the person I was, and on my plans for the future. Having met you and working with you was a real and rare privilege, renewed every time we met over the years in Luxembourg or in scientific conferences, following your collaboration with Eurostat and my duties as assistant researcher. I'm also very proud of the fact that thanks to me and your acceptance of my invitation to present a paper at the Days of Economic Statistics conference held at the University of Siena in September 1996, you met again Professor Lemmy, laying the foundations for the subsequent collaboration with Siena University. On that event, we presented a very first version of a paper entitled Problems and Comparisons in the European Community Household Panel, considering that at that time, Europe just started the project. The topics under discussion were comparability, creating sources to have a comparable statistical information, and also definition of rules to allow the access to microdata for researchers. The ECHP represented, at that time, the most standardized dataset available for Europe based on harmonized questionnaires. It followed the assumption that comparable inputs can produce comparable outputs. Until 2001, it represented the primary source of data used by Eurostat for the calculation of many indicators in the field of income, poverty, and social exclusion. It was the very first version of the paper, because I still remember that the day before you and I were to come to Italy, Gillian and you hosted me in your house in London. To finish the paper and the slides, we almost did an all-nighter. Or rather, we would have done it if Gillian had not pointed out how late it was, and sincerely, if I wasn't miserably collapsed. I also remember when we went to my parents' house in Umbria, because I wanted to introduce them to you. My parents didn't speak English, but you tried to communicate with them as much as possible. I left you alone for a few minutes, and when I went back, I found you somewhat puzzled by the conversation you were having with them. They were trying to tell you that we would eat truffles for dinner. Obviously, they tried to explain themselves with gestures, And the result was that you understood that we would eat some underground animals that, after being hunted by dogs, were grated on pasta. Poor Vijay, you were definitely incredulous, but without losing your usual aplomb, a smile. Knowing you was important to me from a professional point of view, because in that years we collaborate to development and consolidation of panel surveys with consequent development of longitudinal analysis and methodologies of household panels. It is not a coincidence that the paper we published in the proceeding acts of the 51st ISI session concerned the longitudinal analysis of unemployment spells in the presence of response errors. We explored some methodological aspects in analyzing longitudinal data on the economic activity status of individuals, obtained through a survey taking into consideration the fact that panel and retrospective data were subject to serious response errors. Knowing you was especially important from a human point of view. Watching you and your way of approaching the work and also the life, your way of using time, your kindness on approaching people and managing the human relationships. You showing me that there is not only a way of acting, that the impulsiveness can be reduced, and that a mixture of impulsiveness and reflectiveness is probably the best way to face the life. You showing me the importance of having the courage of your own ideas. Thank you, Vijay, and also thank you for having eaten my work in progress Italian cuisine, even not so improved now, that, as you personally said after one of my invitations, was impressive for my speed in cooking. And thanks for having shown me how the sense of humor can always help. I hope you're in better word. Ciao, Nicoletta.
Thank you, Nico. Now I invite Giuliana Coccia to the table to her speech.
Well, in my career, I met Vijay for different topics last 30 years, more or less. When I was a young researcher, I started to read Vijay reports about World Fertility Survey. I didn't understand anything, but I was involved in Istat with Franco Zanella and the University of Trento to define the sampling for Italian survey. So I was very anxious. And I began to write with a pen to Vijay, to ask more information, to improve my professionalism on this fact. After I met Vijay at international level at Eurostat about household survey, household budget survey. At time, this survey were among the most comprehensive household surveys conducted in all member states. But it was necessary an harmonization. I was a researcher, an Istat researcher, and I participated on the working group on household budget survey. And Vijay was the team leader And we discuss a lot of things about what Italy could improve the Italian data, the Istat data. After I met him again with the European Community Household Survey, the first longitudinal survey in Italy. It was very difficult to work together with the longitudinal size, the cross-national, the estimate. And so, now we have the email. I send a lot of email to ask explanation. And Vijay was involved in the development of the ACHP since 1992. So we have a lot of years to work together. And after, Europe and Italy began to calculate the poverty line on the income. And Vijay has contributed with his study to define suitable methodologies to reach the result. The third topic was in the recent years about the regional estimate on poverty, on which Mattia said many important things a few minutes ago. I met Vijay in Brussels at the social indicator groups at the European Commission, but I changed my role. I wasn't only a researcher. I was the official Italian delegate. I have to improve the regional data to report their reliability to policymakers. At that time was Elsa Fornero and Mario Monti. So we need time to improve methodologies, but I have no time to explain the result to this policymaker. So sometimes we have different point of views. But as said Nicoletta, his aplomb, his smile, smooth the discussion. Generally, we have discussion and a lot, a compulsive exchange of email from me, Vijay, and Eric Marlier. But we are still working on this argument, so we reach the result. I'm sure Vijay was, is, will be a reference point for research for survey design and sampling design. I remember him with deep affection, esteem, and gratitude. Thank you, Vijay.
Thank you very much. So now it's time for your speech. She's Antonella D'Agostino. We attended Vijay lesson together many years ago.
Yeah. What I did is just a letter that I want to write to Vijay. Dear Vijay, I never imagined that you would leave us without warning. And I would be here today to remember with all of you the beautiful person you were and the great scientific contribution you made through your life. I always remember your smile during the many hours spent together working on research projects. And I will carry with me the many things you have taught me over all these years. But today I want to remember you by talking about little things that are part of life. I want to remember the day when I met you for the first time, and that day you two used to talk about during the several dinners we have had together with the other members of our research group in Siena. You called me the Apple Girl. Many years have passed. At that time, I was a PhD student at the University of Florence. If I remember correctly, Professor Lemmy asked me if I could go to the airport with my car to pick up and take to the doctorate for a lesson. An English professor was arriving. At the time, just as nowadays, I was always in a hurry. So I arrived at the airport without having eaten, but fortunately, I had an apple in my bag. At the airport, after the formal presentation, we got in the car. I tried to resist, but I didn't succeed. And on the way, the hunger prevailed, and I pulled out the apple, and I ate it, staring only with the other hand and talking quietly with you. After years, you confessed to me that you could never forget our first meeting. And I will never forget the shocked look with which a British man watched me while I ate the apple while driving fast on that curving road. Vijay, the Apple Girl today thanks you for everything you taught her, and is honored to have worked with you and met you. Thanks, Vijay.
Thank you. Thank you, Antonella. Gianni is here. He has to add something, I think.
Yes, just to conclude a very, very short episode, just to talk about one very important issue which was touched slightly by Giulio, but I would like to touch a little bit more. So this episode was in the winter 98-99. We were in London that period, and we met at Liverpool Street Station. I remember that Gillian drove Vijay or whatever, and we went by train from London to Wivenhoe, to the University of Essex, because he had to work a couple of days there. He had a contract at that period, something like 5 days per month. And we had to write our paper, which was in fact a continuation of the work started, the totally fuzzy relative, started by Bruno, Achille, Nicoletta, and Giulio. So we left London. It was in the evening. We were very hungry. We went by train to Wivenhoe. When we arrived, Vijay said, well, we have to eat. Okay, so he was able to cook very well, to prepare very, well, don't you think so? So he started to prepare some food. He asked me, do you like chili? Well, yes, in principle, yes. Okay, he put probably 3 or 4 pieces, entire pieces. So when I started to eat, it was so good, but so spicy. So I asked Vijay, can we drink something like water? And Vijay, no. And he started to open one bottle, maybe 2 bottles of wine. So I was completely drunk. We finished our dinner, I don't know, midnight, 1, 2, 3 o'clock, I don't know. After dinner, we worked, so it means Vijay worked. And at a certain time, he told me, okay, now you can go to sleep. I have to work because tomorrow morning I have to clone the BHPS into ECHP. Yeah? So I will go at about 6 or 7. When you wake up, you can take the first train and go back to London. So I did like that. So, said that, I would like to invite you for a dinner this evening at 10 o'clock at a Terzi restaurant, which was a place that Vijay liked very much, wishing to celebrate Vijay with a glass of wine all together. Okay?
Thanks a lot to everybody. Thank you.
Good morning. A smaller group than yesterday, but stronger. So today we start with 3 more scientific presentations where the ideas and contributions of Vijay have been really fundamental for the progress of some works and for publishing some original contributions, which is another very important thing. So I briefly present the 3 papers, the 3 presentations. The first concerns the known SM2, Siena micro-simulation model, which was proposed for Eurostat about 15 years ago, in order to convert net into gross income components. And we have the pleasure to have here Gabriella Donatiello from ISTAT, who will present this first paper. The second consists in the contribution of Vijay in 2 directions. The first is the estimation of a variance using jackknife repeated replication. And the second is to expand the fuzzy measure in longitudinal perspective and a multidimensional perspective as well. This second will be presented by Francesca Gagliardi from University of Siena. And then the third is the contribution of Vijay in developing the initial method of Kelly and Lemmy, totally fuzzy and relative. Yesterday, Achille told us that this idea was present, even before I met Vijay. In fact, as I admitted yesterday, when we contributed in the house in Wivenhoe, I was completely drunk. So it's evident that the contribution was only from Vijay, not from myself. And the development into the well-known now integrated fuzzy and relative. And this, of course, will be presented by Bruno Chedi from University of Pisa. So I don't take more time, and I give the word to Gabriella for the first presentation. Thank you very much.
An honor for me to be here.
with you this morning. I had the pleasure and good fortune to meet and to work with Vijay and Gianni since 2004 at the start of the EU Silk gross income production process. Well, what I intend to do this morning with you is to present the main result of this collaboration activity. And first of all, I'm going to present the Siena microsimulation model as used and employed for the silk gross income process. Secondly, I'll focus on the joint use of a microsimulation model and registered administrative data in the Italian silk. And finally, I'd like to point out to the main results of our method and some future developments. It is well known that in order to estimate tax and social insurance contribution, you can use surveys. You can ask directly to the gross amount, or you can use fiscal data if it is available, or you can use a microsimulation model. Well, at the outset of the EU-Silk project in 2004, there were no standardized net gross conversion procedures, but the Siena microsimulation model was adopted as a recommended procedure by the European Commission. According to the EU regulation, the gross income became compulsory for all member states starting from 2007. So in order to not miss this important deadline, in 2004, a feasibility study was launched at ISTAT, and a long collaboration activity with Vijay and Gianni started in that period. And thanks to this collaboration, we decided to use the macrosimulation technique and to use the Siena model developed by Vijay and Gianni and their team. Why we decide to use the Siena microsimulation model? The model is appropriate for multi-country application. The model system includes both a standardized set of routines, which can handle many types of data, and country-specific routines that are able to convert the input data into a standardized form and specify the parameters of the national tax system. It can be said that the model is fully database, which means that all the information on income component have to be collected, compiled, or imputed in some form in the model. But the model doesn't incorporate the simulation benefit or any other income component, but it is possible to do this. But it's not the main aim of the model, because the task of the model is the conversion procedure of incomes. In order to determine the tax due, all the taxable income are pulled together over components and over person in the tax unit. And the procedure of gross to net is quite simple, because the tax rules are a function of the format. But on the contrary, going from net to gross amount is a little more complex, because it requires iterative solutions. Here you can see the basic relationship between gross and net amount. Well, for the silk in Italy, we use the net to gross procedures. And as I said, this is a little more complex because it involves a double iterative loop. In this procedure, the tax rate has basically two functions. The first one is a parameter in this procedure. The model starts from a net value, and the system finds a gross value which must return the given net value. And the tax rate also provides a means for the disaggregation of the total tax by income component and the decomposition of the total net into components. It should be noted that the model always converges to the solution in a number of fixed iterations using a single conversion parameter. Well, for the gross income production, in ISTAT we had admin data, administrative data, and this allowed to develop a mixed strategy of microsimulation technique and micro-integration for the estimation of gross income. It can be said this is an innovative method that goes far beyond the traditional net to gross conversion surveying that I will explain soon. As I mentioned before, the Siena microsimulation model was developed by Vijay and Gianni, and their team was based on the European Consumption Household Panel. It was developed for Italy, Spain, and France, including the 2003 year tax rule. So the first model that we developed in ISTAT was for the years 2004-2006. And this new model required the transition from the SHP to the UCL survey. And this required the adjustment to some conversion routines, such as for the self-employment income and for the temporary subcontractors income. And we had to include the tax reform of the year 2005. This first provisional model was characterized by a better quality of the input data because for the transition to the new EU6 survey, but was characterized also for the integration fiscal data in the input file of the model. For the first time, we used tax returns for the calculation of tax credit and income deduction instead of regression technique. I remember when I went here for studying with the Vijay and Gianni how to modify the model for the introduction of this information into the input file of the model. Then we developed the final model for the survey year 2007. And then we had to include the new tax reform that we had in Italy in the 2007. And this final model was based on a massive use of fiscal data. Not only we use tax return not only for the calculation of tax credit and income deduction, but also for the income from employee income, the self-employment, the pension, and the unemployment benefit. This important result was published in the International Journal of Microsimulation with a paper written by Vijay, Gianni, and I. And then we presented the main results. The main results were presented by Gianni and I at the first and second International Microsimulation Conference in 2007 in Vienna and in 2009 in Ottawa. And then Vijay invited me to present another paper on the comparability issues on the third conference of European Research Association, Survey Research Association. So these all was very wonderful experiences for me. I learned a lot, and I had the pleasure to work with Vijay and Gianni and have so wonderful results. Here you can see as the Italian tax regime is included in the model. And, I can say that the main feature of our method is that we use both record links and microsimulation. This is why we have an incomplete coverage of tax data. And on the other hand, we have the underreporting of survey data. So the linkage with tax files has the aim to impute the missing value and minimize the underestimation of the survey data. And on the other hand, microsimulation could allow us to estimate taxes and social insurance contribution not covered by the tax files. So all these information are used as input file of the model, and the fiscal data on net income tax credit income deduction are employed with survey data in the model and used as benchmark for the microsimulation result. So the microsimulation outputs are finally compared with the available fiscal gross income at the micro level. In this way, tax data and microsimulation estimate are both applied for reciprocal comparison and validation. And this comparison is very useful for detecting some inconsistencies in administrative data, such as in the case of the social employee contribution or in the case of particularly unreliable amounts of taxes or gross incomes. At the end of this process, the taxes estimated by the model are replaced by the registered taxes, if available, because these are the taxes actually paid by the taxpayers. But we add a stochastic component to the registered taxes in order to anonymize this data. In more details, I can say that when the net administrative incomes are higher than the survey incomes, both net and gross income completely arise from register, and the final data do not differ much from the fiscal data. On the contrary, when we have survey incomes higher than the registered data, the net incomes are those taken from the survey, are data collected or imputed. But the taxes derive from registered data, and the final data are quite different from the fiscal ones. It's worth noting that this difference between survey data and tax data could not be considered as a direct measure of illegal tax evasion, because it's not possible for us to discriminate between legal tax avoidance and tax evasion. As a result of our method, the adjustment factors that used in any macro-simulation model for correcting the disposable income, for taking into account the tax evasion, are not applied. Because the ITSILC disposable income partially included income not reported to tax authority, and the taxes for the most part derive from the tax return, so they do not require any adjustment. And now let's have a look to the main result and the comparison with the national account, the state national accounts. As you can see, the agreement is good. And the main differences are on the estimation of social insurance contribution for employers. Well, actually, we have to consider many factors for explaining the good agreement with national accounts. Well, in national account, the Italian national accounts, we use administrative data which are integrated in SILC. And on the one hand, its SILC income is usually higher than the administrative one. And on the other hand, the SILC underestimates financial capital income, as always in income surveys. But the national account estimates are adjusted to account to the grey economy, and the grey economy is partially covered by its SILC. So it is likely that all these factors all together could explain the good agreement between the two sources. Well, now I'm going to present a result of a deep analysis for the assessment of the macro simulation after the final taxes. So for the SILC 2015, you can see that the 5.6% of the taxpayers are not linked with tax register. This is why, because these numbers include the so-called de facto household component, which are not included in the frame, but are present at the moment of the interview. And these numbers include also some minor errors for the linkage procedure, errors in the generation of the fiscal code. This is the key for the linkage. Of these 94.4% of linked with tax register, the 82% have tax derived from tax register, and the 80% are micro-simulated taxes. Then, for going in a deeper assessment of the micro-simulation output, so we had to do some preliminary steps. And we had to adjust for taking into account the tax evasion through the analysis of professional categories with survey income but not tax returns, such as the domestic workers, caretakers, waiters, or the workers of the construction and agricultural sector. Then we had to consider that when we estimate taxes from a micro-simulation model, these are the final taxes. These taxes don't include repayment receipt for tax adjustment. So in order to compare the macro-simulation outputs and the final tax, we had to adjust and include this repayment receipt for tax adjustment. And here you can see the comparison of the final tax and the micro-simulation estimate by income brackets and for the employee income and self-employment income, and also for the old age benefit and the total tax. So the final result of this assessment was that, as expected, the micro-simulated taxes for the employee income are quite close to the final one, while the estimate for the self-employment income are higher than the final tax for all the income classes. We believe that the self-employed are able to benefit from higher deduction tax credit in the tax return, other than those included in the model. And in case of the old age benefit, the taxes are rather high for the lowest classes. And this is why the final tax includes a lower taxation for the disability benefit paid after the retirement age, that according to the regulation we had to include in the old age benefit. But the model is not able to catch this particular type of situation and apply a common rate. So the micro-simulated taxes are higher for these lower classes. Well, I can say that now we are in the phase of a very big structural change for EU Circ. For the entry into force of the new regulation of social statistics for the 2021, this new regulation is a unified basis, legal basis for all the social microdata collection, not only SICT, but also labor force for the European health survey, for the household budget survey, and the time use survey. This new regulation defines many aspects from the domain, the taxes, the detailed taxing, until the precision requirement for the regional estimates. So, in particular, for what regards the SILC, there are many important changes. The first one was the type of data collection with 3 types of frequencies: the yearly, for the variable included in the nucleus, every 3 or 6 years in the rolling modules related to particular aspects such as health, housing condition, consumption, wealth. And there are also other modules, the so-called new policy need ad hoc modules. The new regulation have reformulated precision requirement at the national and regional level for what concerns the at risk of poverty and social exclusion, and also for the persistent at risk of poverty for the longitudinal component of the survey. And also the duration of the panel may change from 4 years to 6 years. And the most important thing is that with the new regulation, we had a shorter deadline for data transmission. So, for example, for the survey of 2019, we have to transmit the data at the end of 2019. This is a very big change. So, as you can imagine, timeliness is the priority for CIRC, because according to the current regulation for the survey of the 2019, we have to transmit the data at the end of November of the next year. And for improving the timeliness of this data transmission, there are many means, such as accelerate the fieldwork in the first part of the year, improve the data processing, the automatic check, or use micro-simulation estimate for provisional partial income data, or if it is possible, use admin data that are available earlier. With the aim to provide a timely indicator on income, poverty, and inequality, from 2016, flash estimate on income distribution are published for the previous year, which means at the beginning of the European semester as experimental statistics. These flash estimates are based on the Euromodel microsimulation model for almost all countries, and Italy as well, and used as an early warnings. And it should be noted that the Euromodel will be completely transferred from the University of Essex to Eurostat by the next year, including its update and maintenance. This new regulation has undoubtedly a strong impact on the silk production process. As I mentioned before, the microdata have to be transmitted 11 months before the current deadline. But in Italy, we use admin data. Admin is a resource for our survey because it improves the quality of the survey, but it's not available in time for an early release. So now we have a complex project for achieving this goal, that is using the Social Security database for a timely release of its silk employee income. And the provisional results are quite encouraging. So let me conclude by saying that in the near future, we intend to explore other Social Security databases, in particular those concerning the temporary subcontractors and the employee of the agricultural sector. For the new precision requirement of the silk regional estimate, this requires an enlargement of the current silk sample. And finally, I can say that Italy is one of the few countries that accepted the extension of the 6-year panel in order to achieve a more reliable estimate on persistent poverty. So you can see in the references the paper that we made together, Vijay and Gianni, and all the work that we have done together for this important achievement. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Gabriella. While Francesca is taking the position, I would like to add something about the contribution of Vijay in the SM2. Firstly, I start from the consequences, immediate consequences. So first of all, in Turkey, which was the first candidate country who wanted to implement SM2 after this exercise in Italy, Spain, and France. So they wanted to start in 2007 from the beginning. And then it was a big success. And after that, SM2 was implemented in Greece, and more recently in other candidate countries like Albania, Macedonia, Montenegro, and now Kosovo. Have been recently in Kosovo to start this implementation. Moreover, also in Portugal and Spain have taken SM2 as a benchmark. They have adapted to other microsimulation models that they have. So, I mean, these ideas have not been used only in Italy, but also in, let's say, several other countries. Of course, Northern European countries or continental countries probably do not need, because they have very good registers where you can find net income, gross income, any kind of information on benefits. Second, this method is able to converge easily, as I said by Gabriella, because of a very simple but brilliant idea of Vijay of using only one convergence parameter, even if there are 5, 7, 8 different income components. In fact, we discussed with Vijay, and they had this idea. Well, we have, from this routine, we have firstly taken out the common deduction and just leaving the component-specific deduction, and then using this parameter before taking out the common tax credit. Only this way this method can converge. And other people, statisticians and economists, did not understand well, this. Why? Because this came from the background of Vijay, as a physician, So his brain was really thinking in a different and brilliant way before being a statistician. So, secondly, I want to stress how Vijay was generous. At the beginning, we started with a micro-simulation model. So Vijay said, well, we have to give a name. So I said, I want to give a special name, Siena, because he was here. So Siena Micro Simulation Model, SMSM. It's too long, SM2, SM to the second, You want to give more importance, to this model and to Siena. So again, thank Vijay for this, how he was so generous towards Siena, our team, our university, as also stressed yesterday by the rector. So now let's go to the second presentation by Francesca Gagliardi. Thank you for having included our names as well, but you should. So, JRR variance estimates for longitudinal fuzzy measures of multidimensional poverty. Please, Francesca.
Good morning, everybody. And as you know, I've been working with Vijay since the end of my PhD. And at the beginning, directly inside his house, because our office was directly inside his house here in Siena. So for several years, we work all the day with him. We work, we cook, we do everything inside the house because he was alone without Gillian and he needs also help. And then we moved here at the university and we were together in the same room. So we had a regular relationship of work, but not just of work. And the work that I present today is our latest work that we have done together that actually has not been published because we have nearly concluded. Now is in the end of Gillian that is reading it to check our English. And in this work there are the idea of DJ that comes from several previous works. So the idea of JRR, the idea of longitudinal measure of poverty, and the multidimensional measure of poverty. And in fact, during all these years, we have been working with him on USILC survey, well, at the very beginning with ACHP survey, and then very in depth with the USILC survey with several international research projects. We have been working on fuzzy measure of poverty, on longitudinal measure of poverty, not just fuzzy, also the conventional one, and most of all on variance estimation, working in particular on the methodology that is known jackknife, repeated replication, or JRR. And concerning the USILC, as it has already been said also yesterday, Vijay was being considered the father of the USILC survey because he developed it since the very beginning. And so we have been working with him. We really several Eurostat and EU projects that leads to a large amount reports to Eurostat and to EU to help them in developing the survey, checking the quality of data, the quality of quality reports, and to help them in estimating the main parameters and also in estimating variance, so sampling error and also non-sampling error. And this also leads to these two important papers that have been published as working paper to Eurostat, where there are parts of the works that we have been developed with him, and it means that what we have developed has been officially adopted by Eurostat and by the member states. And concerning the fuzzy measure of poverty, it has been already introduced yesterday and also this morning that Vijay introduced the new membership function for the development of a fuzzy measure, and then the integrated fuzzy and relative measure with Gianni, with Bruno, and Achille. And we have further been working on this concept, and we have been able, thanks to him, to produce these papers that, in particular, the first one has been published on an important international paper, where we construct fuzzy measure at European level for each single country, at national both, but also at regional level. And then longitudinal measure of poverty, because we have been working with him first with the longitudinal part of the USILC, first with the conventional longitudinal measure of poverty, and then we move to develop new longitudinal multidimensional fuzzy measure of poverty. But this was something very new, because the longitudinal fuzzy was has not been first developed. And also this research work has been published in Social Indicator Research, and then also in this book of Routledge, edited by Gianni Betti and Achille Lemmi. And finally, the jackknife repeated replication, that is probably the largest part of our work that we have been developed, because this methodology that was not a new methodology, but we have extended and applied it to really several different measures, to several different problems. We have applied it for subpopulation, so also for small geographical domains, for example, regional, for longitudinal measure of poverty, for example, to estimate persistent poverty rates, for measure of net changes and average across cross-sectional, always using the rotational panel design of the USILC. And most importantly, we have clarified all the practical aspect problem that we have when we have to estimate the variance from survey measures such the USILC. Because as we know, for complex sample survey like the one of USILC, to estimate variance, we need to know exactly the sampling process and the sample structure of the survey. And as we know, mostly this information is not clear, is not published, and so we have developed together technique to understand how to deal with this problem, and also when we are able to have all the information concerning the sample structure, mostly, very frequently, this sample structure is not appropriate to directly use it to compute variance. And so we have developed concept and methodology to how to construct and how to redefine this sample structure so that we can use it to estimate variance. And again, also this kind of work has produced several international papers. The recent one is the first one that has been published in International Statistical Review, where we applied jackknife for fuzzy measure of multidimensional poverty. And this is a quite important paper because, first of all, we have produced estimate of the variance for multidimensional fuzzy measure of poverty, but then also because we have developed that the multidimensional measure of poverty are more stable than conventional measure of poverty. So they could be also a good measure to be used at a regional level, where we know that we have a problem of stability of the data. And so instead of the conventional measure at the regional level, a good solution when the sample is not efficient could be also to use multidimensional measure of poverty, because we have found that they are much more stable. And then if we come to our final, the latest work, so we use all these concepts that we have introduced, and we use so the fuzzy measure inside the multidimensional poverty, and we move them from the cross-sectional to the longitudinal concept, using, of course, the theory on the operation of fuzzy sets. And the methodology that we have developed is quite general, and we are able with this methodology to construct several, quite a large range of longitudinal measures. And in this particular work, we not just develop this measure, but we estimate also the variance of these new measures. And just to give you an idea of a brief idea of what we have done, so given that this is a longitudinal measure, we consider, for example, 6 consecutive time periods, and we consider the propensity to be in poverty or not in poverty for 6 consecutive periods. And you see then on the left side of the panel, and in the right one, we just have order, in descending order, the propensity to poverty. Given this definition, where you say mu1, mu2, mu3, and so on are the propensity to poverty, and mu bar is the opposite, the propensity of non-poverty, we can construct several different multidimensional poverty measures, such as the continuous poverty, so poverty at 2 continuous time, the transient poverty, so poor at 1 time over 2 times period, and then all the other, several other measures of poverty that can be compared to the classical one. And what we have developed, as we found in the cross-sectional multidimensional measure of poverty, also in the longitudinal measure of poverty, where we apply our exercise to NUTS, to region of Spain for USILC, generally the multidimensional longitudinal measure of poverty are more stable than the corresponding conventional longitudinal measure of poverty. So again, at regional level, this kind of measure could be a good solution to achieve more efficient estimates. And finally, of course, thanks to Vijay for its great contribution to our research works.
Thank you very much, Francesca. And here I also would like to add another very important contribution of Vijay in the JRR methodology. You know, in this jackknife repeated replication, in every replication you take something out from the sample and you create a new sample. You can take out one individual or family, But then the replication is very similar to the original sample. So normally it is taken out the so-called PSU, primary selection units. But taking out something, you have to slightly increase the weight of that stratum, of that area, of that region, otherwise is underrepresented. And until that period, the classical formula, they just increased by a factor, you know, which was n divided by n minus 1. So independently of the real weight of that PSU, but especially going to longitudinal measures, you can see that in one cluster, in one PSU, you may lose individuals and families over time. So the real weight of that PSU may change, does not represent anymore the population, the real population. So we thought, but it's not fair, you know, just to increase the weight independently of the real weight of the PSU. So Vijay, in a very simple way, but brilliant way, thought, wow, we should consider also the weight of the individuals and households that are remaining inside that PSU. So we just modified a formula, which was published in Journal of Applied Statistics in 2011. We really had a great impact in the literature, you know, and that was a very simple but brilliant idea. So, next, I want to give the word to Bruno, which we start from 95, arriving to more recent contributions of Vijay. So, a glimpse to Vijay's contribution to the fuzzy approach to poverty measurement.
Okay,
thank you, Bruno.
I would like to say that I work in the University of Pisa, but I come from this university, and I remained in very close contact with the group of Achille Lemmi, and we did many work with Gianni and also Antonella, Giulio, Ghellini, etc. So I went to University of Essex in 1994, but I didn't have the chance to meet Vijay at that time because he wasn't there yet. So I met him some year later here in Siena, and I met him through Gianni and Achille. And so we began to share our common interest for the fuzzy approach to the measurement of poverty. And as Achille told yesterday, and I didn't know or I didn't remember, an important intuition, an important idea came to Vijay immediately when he saw this presentation by Achille about this fuzzy approach, and later we put together his idea with our former model. So I'm going to illustrate now Vijay's contribution to the fuzzy approach to poverty measurement and analysis, in particular for what concerns our collaboration, and my collaboration with Vijay happened jointly with Gianni, Betty, and Achille Lemmi. Since many of you don't know about poverty measurement, so I prefer to put this contribution in a framework so that even those of you who are not, not familiar with this field of research can understand something. So most of the methods designed for the analysis of poverty share two basic limitations. Most of all, they are unidimensional in that they only use one variable, which typically is income or consumption expenditure. And secondly, they need to divide the population, to dichotomize it into two groups, very rigidly classified, the group of the poor and the group of the non-poor, by establishing the so-called poverty line, which is a level of income under which all the individuals are classified as poor. But it is widely recognized that poverty is a much more complex phenomenon that cannot be reduced to the sole monetary dimension. And this leads to the need for a multidimensional approach that consists in extending the analysis to a variety of indicators, of non-monetary indicators of living conditions. So, from one side, the increasing demand for multidimensional analysis stimulated the development of surveys on living conditions. And from the other side, this development of the surveys stimulated more demand, more development for multidimensional analysis. But little attention so far has been devoted to the to the way how to overcome the rigid poor-non-poor dichotomy. In fact, poverty is not just an attribute. A person is not just poor or non-poor. Poverty should be treated as a matter of degree. And so we should find a good way to measure the degree of poverty of each individual or family. By contrast, most of the literature on poverty measurement still nowadays continue to make use of this dichotomy between the poor and the non-poor by the use of these poverty thresholds. A theoretic framework that allows us to overcome this rigid dichotomy is provided by the fuzzy set theory initiated by the mathematician Zadek in 1965. Very synthetically, if we have a set X of elements, and the elements are come si dice piccolo, small x, these are the elements of this space X, any fuzzy subset A of X is defined in this way. Every element of X can belong to A, to the fuzzy subset, but to some degree, in a certain, with a certain measure that is represented by this which is called the membership function. This function assign to any element of set X a number between 0 and 1, which measure the membership of the element X in the fuzzy subset A. Now, an early attempt to implement the fuzzy set approach to the measurement of poverty was made by two Italians, Cerioli and Zani, in 1999. However, their membership function was defined with an ad hoc procedure, so without economic foundations, and they kept using arbitrary thresholds. So in a way, they couldn't really solve the problem. In 1995, Kelly and Lemmy developed the so-called totally fuzzy and relative approach, which was an attempt to solve these problems and to define a membership function with economic foundations and with no use of poverty thresholds. Obviously, after this initial contribution, this approach developed into two directions, with somewhat different emphasis, but with common orientation and framework. The first development, not in order of time, but was carried out by Gianni, Betty, and myself in the years between the years 1995 and 2004. The second one, still by Gianni and by Vijay, in the years between 1999 and 2004. Then we talked, we shared, and we decided finally to integrate these two different developments. And between 2006 and 2008, Betty, Kelly, Lemmy, and Verma published 3 or 4, I don't remember, papers in which we drew the state of the art of these developments, and we decided to integrate them in the form of an integrated fuzzy and relative approach to the analysis of poverty and non-monetary deprivation. So, when we talk about these approaches, there are several issues related. First of all, the measurement and analysis of income poverty, the measurement and analysis of non-monetary deprivation, how to measure both types of poverty together, and how to extend the fuzzy analysis to poverty dynamics when we have longitudinal data, panel data. So all these issues are very important and were treated by us. Clearly, I cannot talk about them all, so I made a selection, and I will illustrate briefly only the first one. But Vijay contributed to all of them very much. And he helped to give mathematical rigor to this approach, that is to say, total consistency with fuzzy set theory, economic foundations, and great common sense. It is good to stress this third point, because many, in economics, according to my experience at least, many models have mathematical rigor and apparently economic foundations. But I found that several of them lack completely of common sense. So common sense is very important in scientific work. I illustrate the approach departing from the traditional one, the traditional approach to poverty measurement. So in conventional methods, we use an income threshold that is called the poverty line and commonly indicated by Z. We fix, according to several criteria, these poverty thresholds, and we classify all the individuals or family who have lower income than Z, we classify them as poor, and we classify all other people as non-poor. So, in terms of fuzzy set approach, these imply to assign degree of membership to the poor, 1, to all those who are below the poverty threshold, and to assign a degree of membership to the poor equal to 0 to all the people who have income greater than Z. Clearly, if you see it in this term, you can easily understand that this conventional approach is very rough, because it makes no distinction, for instance, between people who are slightly below the poverty line and people who are slightly above the poverty line. They are treated in a very different way. So what Cerioli and Zani did in their contribution, they established 2 poverty thresholds, and they decided to classify these poverty thresholds were the first one below Z and the second one above Z. And they decided to classify as completely poor people below Z1 and completely non-poor people above Z2. But for what concerns people whose income is between the 2 values, they applied a fuzzy approach. They defined a linear membership function so that the level of poverty of individuals decrease linearly between Z1 and Z2. So, of course, this is a more realistic approach than the conventional one. However, it has 2 faults. First of all, it has no economic foundations in that the way to define this poverty, this membership function is ad hoc. It fits, but it has no economic foundations. The second problem is that they avoided 1 poverty line, but introduced 2 poverty lines, equally arbitrary than the first one. So what Achille and I did in our initial contribution in 1995 was to try to overcome these problems, and we introduced a membership function to the poor. So we defined the degree of poverty in this way. We took the income distribution of income, and we simply defined the membership function to the poor in this way. 1 minus the distribution function of income. Sorry, I will not explain what is this income distribution, but if you simply look at the picture, you can realize that this is a more realistic representation of poverty than the previous one, because we assign the value 1 only to the poorest. and the value 0 only to the richest individuals. In between, as the income increases, the level of poverty decreases. And this is a relative approach, not an absolute approach. An absolute approach would require a different method, but when you treat poverty as a relative phenomenon, this way to specify the poverty degree of any person is completely realistic and economically founded. And as you can see, we didn't use any poverty thresholds in this way. So we do not speak of the poor and the non-poor. We simply distinguish the ones who are poorer from the ones who are less poor. This membership function, when so defined, is simply the proportion of individuals less poor than the person concerned. So if we have a certain level of income here, for instance, the corresponding level of poverty would be this one, and this one is represented by the proportion of people who are less poor than the person with this level of income. Then Vijay came and he liked this approach, but he wanted to go beyond. He wanted to go further. So together with Gianni in 1999, they modified the membership function, so the way to define the degree of poverty, and replaced the income distribution function with the Lorentz curve of income. In this way, the degree of poverty of any individual is represented by the share of total income received by all individuals less poor than the person concerned. So he replaced the proportion of people less poor than the person concerned with the share of total income received by all the people who are less poor. For sure, this specification, 1 minus L, is more sensitive to the actual disparities in income compared to the previous one. So here we have the representation of the Lorentz curve for income. The more this Lorentz curve is distant from this line, the straight line represents the situation where all the income are equal. So the more this curve is distant from the straight line, the more income is concentrated. So the higher is income inequality. So here we can see the two membership functions, the one defined by Achille and myself, and the one defined by Vijay and Gianni. And we can see that in general, the two membership functions are different. They would be equal only in the situation of perfect equality. And in general, the membership function invented by Vijay is higher than the one invented by Achille and I. And the difference is greater when as inequality grows. So anyway, recognizing that both specifications are meaningful, effective, and theoretically founded, in 2006 we decided to integrate these two approaches and to put the two specifications together in this way. So the new specification that we defined is a combination by means of product of the two specifications. This is the one, the first one, and this is the second one. This exponent alpha represent a sort of weight that we give to the less poor compared to the poorer people compared to the less poor one, and we choose this parameter in a way that the mean of this membership function is equal to the official headcount ratio age, and we did this choice in order to facilitate comparison between the estimates of poverty that comes out from the fuzzy approach with the official estimates of poverty who are derived according to the conventional approach. Clearly, once that we have measured the degree of poverty of any person, we have to construct a collective measure of poverty for the whole population or for sub-populations. For instance, for the young people, or for the retired, or for men, or for women, or for different regions of Italy. And so we take the mean of the individual poverty, degrees of poverty, over different subpopulation. And it is interesting to notice that the mean of this membership function equals a transformation of the so-called generalized Gini index. The Gini index is a fundamental inequality index, very used in economics and in statistics. So this is a good result that Vijay demonstrated. And this function, this generalized Gini, coincides with the standard Gini when this parameter alpha is taken equal to 1. And I stop here. As I said, Vijay's contribution goes beyond the small part that I illustrated, but of course, I think this is enough. So thank you.
Thank you, Bruno. We are almost on time for the coffee break, but I just want to add the last thing because it was very important for me. As I said yesterday, we were thinking on this idea during the winter 98-99. And you have mentioned the paper Betty Verma 99. That paper consists in proceedings of a conference. In fact, Vijay was invited as the keynote speaker of the 99 International Islamic Statistical Society. So Vijay agreed, but was able to choose the topic. So he said, well, why don't I present this idea, this paper? But instead of sending just his name, Verma, he sent both names, you know? After some months, and this conference was in Lahore, Pakistan, you know, Punjab. but not the Punjab where Vijay was born in India, but the Pakistani Punjab. But it was very close. At a certain point, well, there were not really good relationship in spring '99. So Vijay said, "Why? Well, why don't you go to Pakistan to present the paper, you know?" And I said, "Well." I was very happy from one side, but very anxious from the other side. So at the end, I went alone, but I had to represent Vijay. So they let me open this conference with more than 1,000 people, you know. So there was Minister 1B, and then this young guy, you know. From Italy, and so, but it was a present, a gift from Vijay to me. Yeah, I think that it was an excuse, you know, Pakistan. It was just an excuse. He wanted to send me, you know. It was really, and I have realized later on. So this is just another pill, another of how he was generous. To me and to us and to the entire group. So I think the coffee break is ready. I don't know if you want to ask something or maybe we can discuss informally during the coffee break. So after the coffee break, there will not be any round table. Just some of us will meet here for other purposes. So you will be free to enjoy the town after the coffee break.
Yeah, would it be possible to share the presentations after the meeting?
Oh, okay, yeah, good. Not only that. I please ask you to provide all your contributions, you know, all the letters to Vijay and so on, because we plan to publish something, you know, to collect scientific and non-scientific, you know, contributions. We don't know yet in which format. We have some links with Routledge, Springer, and Wiley, but we want to do something, okay? So please send us your written presentations. And of course, we will share everything with everybody here in the audience. Okay, we will try to make a sort of a mailing list. And, and this mailing list could also be very useful for the future, you know. Sometimes, oh, I remember this, and I share with all the others, you know. I think that could be, or maybe we can share some pictures, we can share, because we received pictures from Burç, from Turkstad, so, where Gillian and Vijay were in Ankara, I believe. Okay. Again, thank you very much.